gotten up and talked before here, and I think we're kind of on the same spiritual wavelength. So, Mark is a self-made philosopher who has studied spirituality, personality, psychology, near-death experiences, which is, we need to talk on that too. Hypnotherapy,
Telepathy.
And here's the one I get yelled at a lot. He studies psychics, not physics. And mediums. He has been on a spiritual enlightenment quest and has revealed a multitude of unexpected avenues, which most of us who've had a few years gone down those different avenues. Finding happiness on the journey is just one of the many benefits he has encountered. He's passionate about sharing that journey with those who are interested. And I think that's why a lot of you are here tonight.
Nice.
Come on up, Mark. Laser pointer too.
So the little buttons to the right and left, just take it forward and back, I take it?
Up and down.
Pretty simple, right? So thank you all for coming. I'm actually pretty passionate about this, so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. So my talk is called, Is Happiness Achievable? Or is it like the feather in the storm where you might grasp it for a little bit, but then it blows away and you wait for the next one to come blow along because you can't retain that long term. And truth is, there's a lot of people that are able to be in a state of happiness most of the time. We're going to talk about that tonight. So what is happiness? Most people don't know. They think they do, but they don't. Truth is, a lot of people think it's by acquiring things that is going to make me happy. And especially if you think that's going to be like money, you're dead wrong. Like for instance, you might think, well, if I had this relationship, I would be happy. And that's not true. Because truth is, if you knew that within the next month or something like that, it was going to turn miserable, you would never go into that relationship. You still have the relationship, but you're no longer happy. Or a Ferrari, for instance, or a Lamborghini or whatever, this car is going to make me happy. Well, if you knew a week from now you're going to get in a bad accident,
That's why you get Volvos, because they're really safe.
Exactly. Because a smashed up Volvo is just as fun, right? So bottom line is the happiness comes from inside. It's not from something you acquire or something that you think you need. So what do you think of when you think of spirituality? And what does spirituality have to do with happiness? And I'm going to talk about that because I can assure you that I wasn't always in a happy state, and I was actually suicidal at one point. But I am in a completely different world now, and it is almost ecstatic comparatively to what I used to live in. And that's why I'm passionate about this, because I believe that other people can certainly get there. So a little background on me. Grew up in a very devout Catholic family, and I struggled because some of my family and friends were able to just believe everything that they were hearing through the Catholic Church, as far as there's this God up in the sky, and if you do good, you're going to go to heaven. If you don't, you're not. And the whole thing just, it bothered me, because I always felt like, what's wrong with me that I can't just accept this faith and like most people seem to be able to. So I was beating myself up a lot over it. And I actually, as I got a little bit older, I went to multiple different churches. I was in Baptist, I was in Assembly of God, I was in Lutheran, tried a lot of different things, and nothing really resonated with me. And so at some point in my early 20s, I became all-out atheist. And so for about 5 years, that was my path, and I was convinced that there is nothing else, it's all science, right? Because I'm very logical, very skeptical, and I don't buy into, I'm not a gullible person by any stretch of the imagination. But what bothered me, even with that path, was that I couldn't understand how this whole evolution thing made any sense, because, okay, so there was this Big Bang supposedly, right? And then the cell was created. Okay, so I can buy that, right? But the environment that the cell arrived in is so perfect that it has all the food it needs and everything. But not only that, it's so perfect, the cell, that it just starts dividing by itself and reproducing itself as it goes. And then that's not far enough. It needs to start turning into creatures that, oh, by the way, they eat each other and they, are able to survive off each other through this whole process, and it turns into what we essentially have today, right? And then also planets, for instance, are in perfect alignment. You would think that through science, if you threw a bunch of mass out in space, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be things running into each other, but it's not. Because of this magic gravitational force, things stay in perfect alignment. They don't hit each other. And we're able to have an environment like we do on Earth where the temperature is perfect and plants and animals can they need each other to survive, and water is required. Air, for instance, we don't really know what air is. Of course, we know it's oxygen, this type of thing, but we have to inhale this all the time in order to survive. If you stop for even a few minutes, you would die, right? So the whole thing became fascinating to me, and this is what sort of led me on this whole spiritual journey, because I really struggled with all of it. So this is a picture of me and my son, and obviously this isn't a fashion statement. I care more about comfort most of the time than I do about what I'm wearing. But this is when he was about 5 years old. He's always been a winter fanatic, and now he's 23. But the reason I put this up is because the first two experiences that I'm aware of that really were spiritual for me revolved around my son. And the first one was when he was actually conceived. I'm talking the minute he was conceived, I had a knowing in me that was like no other I've ever experienced in my entire life. I absolutely knew that I was going to have a child. We were going to have a child. And so it was weird because I didn't want to tell her how I felt about this, but I absolutely knew we were going to have a child. Keep in mind, this is 4 years into our marriage. We weren't really trying to have a child, but we weren't real careful about it either, because we figured if it happens, it's meant to be, right? So when she told me that she's missed her cycle, she needs to go take a pregnancy test, that's when I finally told her, it's like, look, I know you're pregnant. She goes, well, how do you know? And I told her what happened. And so trust me when I say, if she would have came back and said the test was negative, I'd have been like, take it again. I'm that sure. I had in fact, I told friends this back then. I used to have this old classic car that I was a fanatic about, and I spent a lot of time cleaning up, polishing it. I would have bet that thing to somebody against $100 that she was pregnant. That's how sure I was about this. It was absolutely ingrained in me that that's what was going on. The second experience was when he was about 2.5 years old, so about half this age. We were on a trip visiting family, and there was a hotel that was amongst a big mall complex, and they had taken and cleaned up all the parking lots with all the snow into this big massive snow pile, and he happened to have his little sled along, so he wanted to slide down this hill. And on one side went down under the parking lot in a safe area, and then there was this other side that went down, and then it extended down a ditch and then out onto this pond. And it had been a super cold year. So I mean, in my mind, it's like there's 2 feet easy of ice on that pond, nothing to worry about, right? So first couple times he went down the hill, he slid nice and out into the parking lot, and then he wanted to try the big hill, so we let him go onto the pond. But the crazy thing was this: when I let him go from the top of the hill towards the pond, he made it about halfway down, and the sled turned almost 90 degrees immediately and just started going the other direction. I'm sitting there going, what the hell what was that? There wasn't even a chunk of snow in the path. So I was baffled, and he told me later on that he was frustrated that it turned like that. But the interesting thing was, because there's so much salt that they were throwing in the parking lots, the pond never froze more than about a half-inch ice. So as soon as his sled went down, it ended up going and landing on the edge of the ice. He got off of his sled, and as soon as he put both feet down, he busted through, and he was up to his thighs basically in water, right? Had he made it out onto the middle of that pond, there's no way I would have been able to break enough ice to get out there and save my son. He would have died if his sled went to turn. I walked to the spot where that sled turned, and there was nothing there. It was as flat and straight as everything else on that. So those were my 2 first spiritual experiences. Here's an interesting saying. If you talk to God, it's called prayer. If God talks to you, it's called schizophrenia. And that's true, as whether you're Christians or Hindu or whatever. We tend to believe that it's fine to talk to God, because that's just, you know, you're praying and you're asking for whatever you want or whatever the case and trying to create a relationship. But if you hear God talk back to you, you're a wacko, right? That's kind of the mentality in our world. Albert Einstein said, a man should look for what is and not what he thinks it should be. In fact, another interesting phrase I heard recently was, it's almost impossible for someone to learn something that they already know they think they know what it is, or something to that effect. So, in my spiritual journey, one of the first things that I learned, and this was just completely by accident, I ended up running across a video on YouTube about reincarnation, children that remember past lives. And being a very skeptical, very science, very logical person, I'm like, this is nuts. There is no way this is true. No freaking way. But it's like, I'm always open to hearing different perspectives. So I end up watching this thing, and I find out that there's hundreds of cases in where they find out that these children at 2 years old to 4 years old are able to come up with enough evidence and stuff as far as like, I remember when I was an airplane pilot in the war, this is where my plane went down, this was the name of the plane, this was the name of my co-pilot, this was the year it happened. Thousands of cases of this, right? So after watching this video, I'm like, that's pretty compelling. So I started digging more into it, and I started watching more and more, reading books on it, the whole type, you know, thing. This is just, I'm gonna list a few scientific papers up here. This one's an NPR. They talk about this, you probably can't read it from back there, but they're essentially saying that the University of Virginia studied hundreds of cases, and this gentleman joins NPR to talk about it, and I highly recommend you go look this up if you're interested at all and listen to this interview. In fact, if any of you can find anything that goes against what I'm telling you, go on Google. I'm encouraging you to look this up, any of it. And if you can find things that are against what I'm telling you tonight, I want to know, because I don't want to be giving false information to people. You know, people can say, well, it doesn't matter what your spiritual journey is, they're all essentially equal. My position on that is not necessarily, because I haven't found anything out ever that has the amount of evidence that is out there for what I'm talking about tonight. And I'm not trying to convince you to change your religion or anything else, because it's like, trust me when I say I believe everybody is on their path for a reason, and if you're comfortable with where you're at, that's awesome. I'm telling you why I believe what I believe. Okay, so this is another off of I don't remember what scientific paper it was, but this Dr. Ian Stevenson had studied over 1,000 cases between children that were 2 to 4 years old, often talking about events that led up to their death. And he, at the time of this reporting, they knew of over 2,500 cases of children that have these memories and that type of thing. And on average, the children that they or the people that they remembered had died 4.5 years before the birth of the children that were associated with this. This one talks about same type of thing, but they're saying 68% of these 2,500 cases, they were able to verify the facts. So that doesn't mean the rest of them didn't happen. It just means that there wasn't enough evidence about the person that they were talking about that they used to be. But 68%, that's crazy. Okay, so what about NDEs? I'm assuming that you guys know what that is, near-death experiences, right? So again, this is a conclusion of a paper that had a list of like 9 points of evidence of NDEs being real. So it says the great majority of more than 1,000 near-death experiences believers that their experiences were real, right? So that's 1 point, but not all that important. Out of the 1,122 that they surveyed, many were physicians, scientists, attorneys, and nurses. These findings suggest that the majority of us who have not personally experienced an NDE should be very cautious about labeling them as unreal. The combination of the preceding 9 lines of evidence conclude that near-death experiences are medically inexplicable. Any one or several of the 9 would likely be reasonably convincing. but the combination of all 9 provide evidence that NDEs are, in a word, real. And this guy is a MD, and he's one of the world experts on this. In fact, there's another gentleman by the name of Bruce Grayson, and I recommend you look him up as well. For 50 years, he's been studying these, and it started because he was a doctor who dealt with death on a regular basis, and he noticed that 2 or 3 of his patients would talk about people that they had, you know, when they came back, that they had ran into, and these different things, and he, very scientific, you know, took it as, yeah, whatever, you know. But he ran across another doctor that was in a similar field, and they had found out that they both were, you know, had multiple cases of this. So he started to look into it, and he couldn't explain it scientifically, so he dug into it more and more and more. So he had spent, over the last 50 years, studying at least 1,000 cases of NDEs, and he very much believes, as a scientist and a medical doctor with a PhD, that they are very real. One of the things that they know through all of this is that everything is connected. And I mean everything. Like, we are all part of the same plants, animals, rocks, everything is connected. In fact, there's 2 gentlemen that won the Nobel Prize in 2022 for proving that quantum entanglement is real. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but essentially, in a nutshell, what they proved is that if they take like a laser beam and they run it into a pyramid, you know, glass pyramid, obviously the light splits, right? But this light started as one source. So these 2 beams of light split and go their own directions, right? So they don't, it doesn't matter if it's 1,000 miles or 1,000,000 miles or multi-million miles. If the light beam on one side slams into a planet, let's say, they have proof that the light beam on the other side, there was an atom that was affected, or a proton affected, exactly, I don't mean the speed of light, exactly the same time as the one that hit the planet over here. So they know for a fact that everything is connected. This goes on to talk about more quantum entanglement and that type of thing, and they're saying it may lead us towards the fact that there's a multiverse, meaning that our universe may not be the only universe out there. There's other ones that they believe, and this isn't proven or anything, I'm not saying that, but they believe by theory that it's possible that there's multiverses, that there's life going on at the same time all over the place type thing. Just another scientist, physics, new scientist. What you experience may not exist inside the strange truth of reality. And I don't want to spend too much time on this stuff, but I'm happy to answer any questions on this. So what's cool for me is my journey led me to the point where I used to wonder, you know, about, are aliens real? How were the pyramids built? All these different things. And through my studies of all this stuff and through my own experiences, I've answered pretty much every question that I had on this stuff. I mean, that's not to say I still don't enjoy hearing about a near-death experience and that type of thing, but as far as, I don't have a ton of questions, and that's why I like to go out and talk about this stuff, because it's pretty exciting and it's pretty damn compelling. So as far as happiness goes, a lot of people find happiness when they discover the Tao. And if you've ever heard of the Tao, there's Taoism is a religion, obviously, that was originated in China, but it's better known as the path or the way. Everything lives in a state of harmony. And basically what the Tao, there's 3 pillars to it. It's simplicity. Gotta think about this because I'm trying to remember what they were now. Compassion. And the third one is, somebody say something? Tequila. Sorry, I forgot the third one. But in a nutshell, what Taoism says is that everything is happening the way it's supposed to happen. You have a quick question?
Oh no, I was just curious, is it like Lao Tzu's patience, compassion, and simplicity?
Simplicity, there you go, thank you. But anyway, it's if you can get to the point where you live basically in the mentality of the Tao, you find out that it's like you don't take things so seriously. You realize that things are playing out the way they're supposed to play out. Like, I used to get too involved in the whole political spectrum, or, you know, just taking on, you know, whether it's climate change or whatever your passions are. I used to get way too worked up about a lot of this stuff. And I've come to find that things are playing out the way they're supposed to play out. And truth be told, if we come back time and time again in a reincarnation scenario, which the evidence points at unbelievably, this is just a blip on the radar as far as the whole sequence. Like, our conscious stays alive the entire time. And so this life really is just about experience, and it's about love. We'll talk a little bit more about that here soon. You might have heard the yin and the yang. This basically means that, another Chinese symbol, there's an opposite side to everything. So you gotta have black if you want white. You gotta have love if you're gonna have hate. You gotta have air to have solid substance. Everything has got, I don't care what you pick, it's got the other side. So, you know, you could say things are good and they're bad. But truth be told, the things that you think are bad that are happening is an experience that somebody needs to learn in this life. There's a reason for it. So the point is to take a third person perspective point of view. And the way you do that is essentially, and this doesn't happen overnight, but you come to realize that if you can step back from your life a little bit and look at it like, this is interesting. Like, I'm watching this flesh body, which really isn't anything. My consciousness is really who I am. This is just a vessel that I'm using to get through this world that we're in currently. And if I can take a step back and look at it like, rather than getting so worked up about the day-to-day things that happen all the time, and I can look at it like, that's really interesting that I'm affected by this in this way, because my brain, which, you know, is tied to this world, is upset over this or that. And it gives you a completely different perspective, because you're analyzing this as almost like, again, a third person point of view. And it totally makes a huge difference in how you feel internally on a regular basis. Follow the path of least resistance. And this doesn't mean just take the easy way out. But what it means is that if the universe is giving you resistance, in other words, if you're in a relationship and you keep feeling like you're running into a wall, that's probably a sign that you're getting over and over and over again telling you this isn't the right path you're supposed to be on. Or it's a job that you keep, you know, having frustrations with, or whatever, on a regular basis. There is an easy path that you're supposed to take, and if you can step back for the Tao and just accept that things are the way they are for a reason, and I'm here and I'm supposed to learn this stuff. Another thing is from a happiness perspective, it's important that we take vacations. And I know not everybody can. Some people have got 4 kids at home and they work in 2 jobs or whatever, right? But mini vacations mean 20 minutes in your chair reading a book, or, you know, listening to music, or whatever relaxes your mind is so super important to help you refresh your brain. But again, try to keep in mind that the universe wants us to succeed, okay? There is it's actually on another slide here, I think, here, quick. The universe wants us to evolve in a more loving place. And essentially, if you think about it, no matter all the trauma you look at today, if you were to go back 50 years or 100 years, I assure you it was far worse as far as the way people treated each other, as far as slavery, if you go back far enough, the way we treated Native Americans. I mean, things are, believe it or not, progressing in the right direction. In fact, it blows me away that you can drop, like New York City, for instance, you can drop millions of people into the same area, and they generally are gonna leave each other alone and be respectful and carry on our day-to-day experience without it turning into absolute chaos and violence. What other creature out there could you do that with? You know, things aren't all that bad. We don't have to look at it so much as always finding ourselves as a victim in the story. We're not the victim. We came here to learn, to get experience, and to give and receive love. That's all it's about. That's the only reasons we're here. So I don't care if you've got some goal that you think you need to make and all that. That's wonderful as far as your private, your personal goals. But it's really not important in the big scheme of things. And it's really critical that we start seeing it that way. Again, your consciousness never ages. You ever wonder why I feel like I'm 18 when I'm 50 or 60 or whatever the case? That's why. Because your body's aging, but your consciousness isn't. It's evolving every life. So for instance, I used to wonder why children that are 6 years old are way better guitarists than I am, for instance, because I've been playing for 20 years and I got probably 4,000 or 5,000 hours into it. It isn't because they put more time into it or they're that much more gifted than I am. They learn this from previous lives and they carry it on. I don't care what the topic is. It could be your background in science or your mechanical ability or your, all of this stuff. There's a truth to old souls. There's a truth to the fact that we become more and more evolved. So when you find somebody that's very simplistic, and it doesn't mean that they're bad or worse, they haven't been here as many go-arounds as a human. That's the bottom line, why that is. Manifesting is real, okay? If you don't believe it, look into the thousands of cases of placebo effects, where they give people these placebo tablets, and they change their health based on taking these pills that they think are real when they're just sugar tablets. Or a case that was done in Bruce Lipton's book called The Biology of Belief. He talks about these women that work at a hotel, cleaning service type people, right? And so they took these 50 women and they split them in two groups, and with one of them they didn't do anything different with, and with half of the group, they brought them in and did a short presentation where they talked about, when you do your job every day, believe it or not, you're exceeding the FDA's requirement as far as like taking your 10,000 steps and you're bending, and so you're getting really good exercise doing this. It's really good for your health. And that's all they did. They did this 20-minute presentation. The difference when they checked them 90 days later, side by side, as far as checking their heart rate, their happiness level, their cholesterol levels, everything was significantly better with the group that was 20%, that did the 20-minute presentation. And if you could sit and think about, I might get cancer, probably will. That's the way it works, because it works on the negative side as well. It doesn't matter. Your mind controls so much. In fact, I know of a gentleman, Joe Dispenza. He actually was a neurosurgeon who had a massive accident, busted up his entire spine. They told him that if you don't get surgery, you'll never walk again and you'll probably die. He didn't like any of his options because they were gonna solidly cage his entire spine. And he felt like, if I die, I die. But I've been studying this stuff about how your mind controls this, so I'm gonna take my chances. And he spent the next 9 months thinking every day about, geez, I can kind of feel my muscle pulling that bone back in place. The guy, 18 months later, was completely able to walk, run, and there's many, many people that witnessed this. So this isn't just like his story that he pulled out of his rear. So happiness is not only achievable, but it's how we're designed to live. And with that, can I take any questions at all? Yes.
I've heard that in the astrological cycle, the order that they're typically listed with Pisces is the last, is supposed to represent that they've gone through every incarnation of every astrological sign until they've ended up at the end Pisces. Do you think there's...
Okay, so
what do you think about that?
No, so my honest opinion is I'm not a big believer in astrology. And it's not because I don't think, it's very possible it's real. I just haven't seen the scientific evidence to back it up. So there's no doubt if you look at the science that people become more and more evolved, but I don't know from an astrology standpoint if that's necessarily the case. Yes?
So just out of curiosity on your kind of view on sort of more science on microbiomes and sort of the stomach being a second brain.
Yep.
So because you were talking about a separation of consciousness,
Yep.
if what we eat and the things affect our mental state, then is in yours kind of stigma, like the body being separate from the conscious, but
Right.
seeing the influence of the body on the consciousness, like what kind of perspective do you have on those kinds of ideas of?
I'm not 100% sure I understand your question, but I mean, there's no question that the gut has a major effect on your body as far as how you treat your gut and the way you think about it and that type of thing is absolutely gonna have an effect on your physical health. Is that?
Well, kind of in the way that like even identity and mood and things are being associated with like mental health and those kinds of things based on
Your gut
what
biome?
your gut
Yep,
biome.
yep.
So if that's such a case, then is your consciousness actually separate from your body? If so much of your mental state is based on what's happening to your body?
Oh, no, it absolutely is still applicable because your human brain is basically designed as a filter, because if you knew coming into this world, all of the things that, you had from previous lives, you wouldn't be learning the things you're learning today. So your human brain is basically supposed to be a filter that's designed to work in this world. So as far as the things that happen with your health have a lot to do with your human brain. But that's still separated from your consciousness. And if you want to get into NDEs, for instance, there are thousands of cases of these people that like float above their body and they can see it as just basically and they have no connection to it as far as emotionally. They look at it like this is a dead corpse that I never want to go back to again because it's way better where I'm at now. But scientifically, they're able to identify what people said like in the waiting room, or 100 miles away, what their family was doing as they were crying around a rosary or whatever. They're able to identify all of that and it can be verified. So there's absolutely no question that this whole consciousness is real and it's separate from your body. You had a question?
Let's see if I can word this right. So you were saying that kind of no matter what we do, we're on a path and we're supposed to find how to follow it right? And is that the same, like it's laid out for us, like a child 2 years old dramatically died, that was their path they were supposed to be down to come back as something different?
I could spend 3 days talking about this. So I'm gonna try to make this as short as I can. So we still have free will. When you come into this world, you definitely have the ability to direct your path in different ways. But in order to get the learning experience that you're supposed to get while you're here, because believe it or not, you signed up for this before you came here. You decided to come into this body, into this family. Your soul family is multiple people that you come back time and time and time again with. My best friend might have been my mom in a previous life, or I might have been his whatever cousin, or daughter, who knows. But there's a path that you sort of signed up for, and you have spirit guides that are trying to direct you down that path, but that doesn't mean that's the path you're not necessarily gonna take. You still have free will to do what you wanna do. Does that answer your question or no?
Kind of, but I mean, if somebody's taken tragically, a child's taken tragically, that wasn't really their free will.
So that's a whole different topic, but here's the story on that is that yes, your death when it happens is predetermined.
Can I ask a question? When did I
Yes.
get the choice of when I came? Because I don't remember ever getting the choice of when I came.
No, you're not supposed to remember it. You basically get a, you basically agree that when you come back to Earth, because of the learning experiences you want to get, again, you wouldn't have the same learning experiences if you knew all your past lives. So you're not going to remember any of that. However, there are people that go into hypnotherapy, thousands of cases of this, by the way, as well, and look this up, please, that get laid on the table and they go into this deep trance and they actually remember what it was like in the in between, if you will, when they made those decisions to come back. There are pre-birth things that, again, they can verify. So a lot of NDEs talk about, hey, I ran into Aunt Joan, I never knew she died. And they're like, no, she didn't. And then they find out later that, yeah, 3 days ago she died, we didn't hear it yet. Stuff like that happens all the time.
2 questions.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of the law of diminishing return? And where's your ashram located?
I haven't heard of that, and I'm not sure about the ashram either. That's new to me. You'll have to fill me in on this stuff later. Yes.
It's kind of like oddly specific, but when you're talking about the children that remember their past lives and how they died.
Yep.
In what you looked up, were there any that were like involved in a crime that led to like evidence discovery and maybe a conviction or something?
Yes. Yeah, there absolutely were. Again, there are so many cases where they can verify. In fact, when you hear about ghosts and that type of thing, that's generally a learning experience for somebody that's not ready to part yet, because they're still attached to this world for some reason, whether that would be a traumatic scenario that they have to get resolved before they can move on. So that's essentially what ghosts are. But yeah, you absolutely.
I have a question for you, it's kind of a personal one, but.
Okay, I'm not gonna go with you.
No. In Buddhism, they talk about it as a practice, that you do some things to encourage you going down the correct path. Some people have walks in nature, other people meditate a certain amount of time every day.
Yep.
Personally, what is your practices to?
Mine is,
Keep on
so
track.
I 100% believe in meditation. I have a harder time doing it because I'm a little bit ADHD. Walks in nature is one of the best things you could do to possibly connect with everything. I mean, you feel differently if you really get out into nature, and it's because you start to realize that things are all connected. I often do what I call tree therapy, where sometimes I'm walking along and I'll just put my hand on a tree and I'll look up at it, and I can literally almost feel an energy between it coming through, and it's crazy to me.
I've been in Sequoia.
Oh,
I've done that.
yeah.
You just went, oh my God.
yeah, isn't that awesome?
You feel the life force.
You do, you totally do.
But that's, I do a lot of the walking in nature to kind of reconnect and just, let the rest of the world go away for a while.
Right, right. No, but nature is, I highly recommend that. In fact, as far as the happiness thing goes, if you can get out in nature, I don't care how down you are and that type of thing, or, petting your pet. It's amazing how, because the big point is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Highly recommend that book
I've
if you
been
haven't read it.
listening to his
I
stuff on
highly
podcast.
recommend that book. It's life-changing. But he talks about living in the present moment, because that's really all we ever have if you think about it. All you experience, we can worry about the future, we can worry about the past, or regret the past. But the point is that all you really ever have is the present moment. The now. And when you're out in nature, or you're petting a dog or cat or whatever, it's amazing how all these problems that you normally have spinning around in your head 100 miles an hour vanish almost immediately when you're in those type of scenarios. Relationships are really one of the only things that are truly important in this world. Yes,
So
again.
just one last question,
Yeah.
is this why when we meet somebody or we see somebody, we know them, but there's no logical reason for us
Yes,
to know them?
absolutely, yes. Soulmates are generally somebody that you were supposed to meet in this life because of the lessons that you were gonna connect with. Either they're learning from you or you're learning from them, or both. That's what those are. There's far less random connections with people that, obviously we run into people every day and it doesn't mean all that much in general. But when you run into people that change your life, those weren't by accident. Those were predetermined run-ins. That's why, even though I like to go on dating sites and that type of thing, because it's kind of fun for me.
I'm glad
It
it's
is,
fun
I
for
love
somebody.
meeting people, I truly do. But the point is I know deep inside that it doesn't matter, because if there's a person I'm supposed to meet, it's gonna happen anyway.
They'll find you.
I don't need to go looking for them, or them for me for that matter. And to be honest with you, sometimes it's kind of sad when I flip through those, because I see all these people that don't know that. And so I know that they feel desperate and sad, and I have mixed feelings about it. Other questions?
Where you go do mushrooms out in the woods with me?
Maybe.
Can I come too?
So, okay, so you wanna talk about that? I have done ayahuasca. Okay, you guys familiar with ayahuasca? So it's the strongest psychedelic known to man, and I did it because I was really curious, because they talked about being on ayahuasca is similar to a near-death experience. I would argue that it's really not necessarily. However, they know that from doing brain scans that your, the brain activity, normally there's like pathways in your brain as far as the electrical energy goes. And when you do ayahuasca or you're in a near-death experience, the pathways completely explode and everything is open to each other. And I felt a love come in, pouring in, that was so overwhelming that I bawled my eyes out. I mean, it was just the most incredible self-love, understanding feeling that I've ever had in my entire life. So, yeah, there's something to be said.
There's a lot of people that have, there's podcasts about it.
Right.
Joe Rogan's interviewing
Right.
people about ayahuasca.
Yep, yep, and you
You
can
know,
get
some
there
of them
through
are drugs.
meditation and stuff too.
But it's a really powerful experience for most of the people who've
Yes.
done that.
100%.
Were you gonna cover something on psychics too? Did you go over that?
Yeah, I mean, we could, I don't wanna go too much time, but yeah, there's a ton of, in fact, one of my favorite, if you're not familiar with, or you don't believe in like mediums and that type of thing, I highly recommend you find a show on YouTube called Seatbelt Psychic. There's a gentleman that is like one of the leading mediums for celebrities because he gets paid a ton of money. And he does this show where he basically has a ride share, Uber, whatever you wanna call it. And he drives people around, and if these people are acting, I'm gonna tell you, it's the best acting I've ever seen in my life. They get in his car and they're like, yeah, I don't really buy into this. And then he tells them about, well, your dad's in the car with us right now, and here's what he's saying. His name is, he'll tell them the name, they'll tell them stories about, things that you did. You need to quit smoking, so he's telling you gotta quit smoking so much weed, whatever it is. And it's crazy, cause these people are just, they go from like complete straight face to just bawling their eyes out. And I'm telling you that if they're acting, they should all be put in Hollywood, because it's phenomenal. And so yes, unfortunately with mediums and psychics, there's way too many fakes out there that screw it up. But there are very, very legitimate people that connect to the other side. Absolutely. Yes?
Isn't manifestation kind of a contradiction to the path that you're set on? I mean, if you're handed cancer, you're trying to manifest it away, but cancer was your path, isn't that kind of a contradiction?
There is some truth in that. However, if you're gonna, whatever you're gonna die from, you're gonna die from. So you're right. There are some limitations on how far you can take that. Like, if you're supposed to die because you fulfilled whatever your journey is supposed to have happened, and you ended up, trying to get around that through manifestation, it's not gonna happen. However, if your body is an independent thing on this planet, so there is a lot of truth and evidence to the fact that you can control your health to much extent based on how you feel about what's gonna happen with your body. Anybody else?
I just want to tell everybody that we were supposed to have a maple syrup talk, and she canceled. And about 3 days later, Mark's friend was walking out of a bar, and as he's walking by me, I kind of felt weird. And Rebecca said, "Did you see Mark? He was just here." And I said, "Which direction did he go?" "Went that way." So I kind of ran ahead of this guy, opened the door, and I saw him pulling out of the parking lot, and I went, "Damn it." So I thought, get a speaker. The guy behind me goes, "You know him?" And I said, "Yeah, it's Mark." I said, "Well, why, you know him?" He goes, "Oh, it's my buddy. I was busting out to catch him too." And then we started talking, and this is the guy who does coffee beans, right, in town?
Yep.
And so Mark graciously said, "Oh, sure, I'll come up and talk again."
And I don't think it was by
Just wanna
accident.
thank him for the last minute jumping in, and
Well, I guess it was the path, I
we're
couldn't
good.
get it.
Exactly.
That's right,
Exactly.
we're good. And hopefully we'll have the maple syrup
Next year.
next year, or whenever we can get a time slot, so thank you for filling in.
Thank you all.
Thank you.